that we've produced. So as I said earlier, for the people who weren't perhaps here, I'm Camilla Reeve of Pale Well Press, and we publish books principally about human rights and the environment. And there's so much that is relevant to that we have quite a wide range of books. But Clare's book, Federal Gods, is absolutely in the middle of our subject area, looking at what happened in Germany when about 1 million people were allowed in the time of Angela Merkel from different areas, 1 million asylum seekers, and made very welcome, and then facing the kind of problems that you can imagine people do face when they've come a long way and they enter a complex society. And Clare was there. She was teaching German as a volunteer teacher to enable the refugees to assimilate, if that's not the wrong word, at least to understand what the hell was going on around them.
Can we cross here? Let's run now.
I'm just watching. Could someone be quiet, please? We're having a reading here. Somebody has just come in saying that they are transmitting malware. I think it's a joke. But could they please put themselves on mute? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, they're now on mute. So basically, Clare volunteered to teach the refugees in Berlin in 2015, and the work in this wonderful book, Federal Gods, covers that period. And it's her response to what they were facing and what she was going through teaching them. And it is very moving, very forceful, and life-changing to read it. Now, while she's reading, I'd like you to stay on mute. And if you want to, you can put responses into the chat room at the bottom, and there will be an opportunity at the end to ask Clare questions and to discuss the book. This is a very brief introduction to her as a person. She's a London, Berlin, and currently Eastbourne-based writer, poet, and coach, and the author of 2 previous poetry collections, The Oranges of Revolution and Copywriting, War and Other Business Sins. I haven't read that one yet. And she's been widely published in a number of journals and magazines, principally Smokestack Lightning, The Cry of the Poor, the Robin Hood book, and lots of others. She also works as an artist, translator, and teacher. And I think the important thing that I get from Clare's work is the importance of witness. She actually saw things, went through things, experienced stress and sadness and anger and friendship in this situation. And it comes through very, very clearly in the way she's written. And there's a particular quote here that from Andy Croft of Smokestack Books, who kindly did some words for our cover. He described this book as an extraordinary account of the refugee crisis, recording in furious detail the miserable realities behind the newspaper headlines. People hungry for life, but starved of kindness. And it seems to me that it's a challenge that faces the whole of Europe, very much in the UK, starved of kindness. There are a lot of good people out there working to help refugees, but there is a notable lack of compassion and understanding in Priti Patel's department and other organizations that come in contact with refugees. And we really need to up our game and help people, because this is just the beginning of what's going to happen in the world as the climate worsens, which is why we're so interested in both subjects. There will be far more people needing a home, needing a new start. And we really need to learn from books like Federal Gods what the challenges are and how they can be helped. So it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Clare now. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. Well, thank you for being here. I think it's so much easier to be here online than being in person, and it's really lovely to have people from all over the place as well, who are really important to me. You know who you are. So first of all, this is, yes, it's a poetry collection, but it's not a collection of random unassociated poems. It is more of a poem story, a collection of stories in a poem, in a long poem, but it's a story essentially. It connects various stories together, and I think what I'm going to do is give you an idea by setting the scene, because just to put the whole thing in context. The actual book itself does run chronologically, more or less, apart from the children who are in a section, about a third, maybe 2/3 of the way through, because I wanted to keep them together. But essentially, it's something that runs from the beginning of my experience to when I stopped. So what I'd like you to do is just maybe think back to 2015. I think all of us had very, very different experiences of what that was like in terms of the refugee crisis that was happening. The Syrian war was going on. Hundreds of people were dying just drowning in the Mediterranean every week. Some medias were reporting this more than others. But I think essentially a lot of people were dying and suffering, and it was being misinterpreted in a lot of media by a lot of governments. And I think we saw different sides of it. I would have done, because I was based in Germany at the time, compared to friends in England or in the States or in other parts of the world. But I'm pretty sure you all remember tabloid images that Farage might have put in the papers, long streams of people running through the countryside, peasants coming over to sponge off your state, all these kinds of images. All in a bid to call for a Brexit referendum and put pressure on Cameron, who unfortunately bended to that, and also wasn't really in a state to be able to be taking in refugees under this pressure, or didn't feel he could for whatever reason. He had his hands tied. Whichever way you look at it, a lot of people were suffering and dying and trying to escape death. So my experience in 2015 was, at some point, Germany decided, well, we're going to open our doors, and they were met by resistance. Neighbours, Austria, Hungary, France, Belgium, UK, all had quotas or said no. So pretty much out there on their own to a large extent. They were taking in, they took in, tens of thousands per month, and we're talking thousands crossing the border, sometimes over the weekend. It was, in the height of the influx, it was very, very busy. A lot of people coming over looking for safety. I think the one thing that we've often seen, Germany's very, very good at organising chaos in quite varied settings, I guess. But one thing it did do was set up emergency asylum homes very, very quickly. You might have noticed that with the recent Ukrainian crisis, how quickly porta cabins in cities like Berlin were set up, the use of unused buildings, derelict town halls. Back in 2015, the Tempelhof airport in Berlin was transformed. The terminal was used as housing. There's actually a program at the moment on the English version of Arte TV called Field of Dreams, and you can actually see what the inside of the airport looks like when it's transformed into an emergency home. It's quite interesting, maybe for you, just to take a look. It's quite horrific in the conditions that people were living without, essentially without privacy, but at the same time, safety had to come first. People had to have somewhere to stay. I guess lots of self-organized groups popped up, volunteer groups, very, very quickly, self-organized over social media. I have no idea what it was like in the UK at the time. All I can say is I was just very, very aware of these activities happening, and being told about, oh, this is happening on this day at this time, come along, I was very aware of this happening, just because people had motivated each other and also mobilized. So I guess, particularly in more socially minded parts of the country, this was definitely happening. There was this will to help. And of course the opposite. So you've got the opposite end of the extreme. You have the far right. You have people who have come from a very different point of view, but that you're going to get anywhere. I'll come to that a little bit later. But in 2015, in August 2015, I heard that this town hall, slightly west of Germany in Wilmersdorf, was going to be transformed into an emergency home. And I decided to go there on the night when it was being set up. It was very, very hot. It was a very, very hot summer. It was over 35 during the day. It was still around 30 at night. They've been traveling possibly for days, weeks. Some people had jumped on a plane because they had money and they could do this. They arrived, they were fine. But essentially, people have just escaped war, conflict, possibly seen family dying along the way, possibly just escaped themselves. And you've got people who are tired and traumatized and hungry and thirsty, and they've got kids screaming and possibly and suddenly, you know, they arrive in this gravel forecourt of a German town hall, and then it's, you know, it completely changes. So I think at the beginning people were looking for a safe roof. That was the main thing. That changes with time. That changes when you feel safe, and then your own personal demands and expectations of life change as well. So that was something that I noticed in the course of the weeks where I was volunteer working at the town hall. But essentially no one up sticks and leaves their country, leaves their family, leaves their livelihood, unless the alternative is worse. So despite all the media that you might have seen, I think that is one truth that goes without. Nobody would do that if there wasn't a reason. So I guess in Germany there was a lot of active support. I think the one thing that comes up in the book, a lot of media likes to portray it as German guilt. Particularly, you know, BBC is no less guilty of doing this. Guilt for World War II atrocities, that it was done out of those reasons. But I'd like to think it was just people were suffering. And if it came out of a feeling of guilt, if it came out of a feeling of we've been there before, we were on the other side of it, we were causing the pain, then so be it. That's my take on it. If it's made people more sensitive to suffering, if it's made people more aware of needing to be kind, then it doesn't matter. The important thing is that people were actually helping. And nobody's perfect. People were trying to find their way in all of this. It hadn't been done to this extent for quite some time. So, and probably never to this extent in Germany, if we're being fair. But people were helping. The government was deciding to help in this case, and I think that's a positive. As I mentioned before, you've got the opposite extreme. So you've got, certainly in the former east of the country, a relatively new democracy that is not used to non-white faces, shall we say, not used to multiculturalism, not used to, just not used to open society, modern society. And I guess, like in other countries, they have a lot of sway. They are very persuasive. They have very persuasive media, very good at using fake news, and pushing through these hate crimes. So there was that. They are scary. I admit that. Nobody feels comfortable with that. Nobody feels comfortable being in dialogue with them, because there is no dialogue a lot of the time, but there has to be some way of breaking through that. And what I've tried to do in these poems is go from various perspectives. So the narratives are not directly from my perspective, but from all these opinions in society. And I've tried to mess around with that a bit. I'm playing a bit with the reader with using different pronouns, we and you, so that they will not necessarily be talking about my perspective, but a host of others. And also in the mix with this is Brexit. So we've got UKIP gaining ground in the summer of 2015, got hundreds of thousands of Brits and Europeans who are suddenly faced with this, hey, but where are we going to be next year? Where's our home going to be next year? We could be displaced, you know? So amidst all these asylum seekers coming over and needing a home, there's a half of Europe that's now suddenly uncertain. Not half of Europe, but a lot of people suddenly not sure where they're going to be, and they're living in a place where they consider home, and it's not the same, but at the same time you feel that you could be at the mercy of people playing a game of tit for tat, and politically you don't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen. There's a complete feeling of uncertainty and insecurity, and yeah, so what I'm aiming to do with my reading is give you, that was a bit of a long preamble, but what I would like to do is give you a flavour of the different themes that were coming up at the time, that surfaced back then and that culminated in the book. So my background comes into this as well, my own situation, my own family's background has all part of it. And yeah, I look forward to any questions that you have. Please just ask. There's some very friendly people in the audience. So please feel free to ask afterwards. What I'm going to do is I will jump around. And I will give you little bits of the story as I go. You came in fat, packed cattle droves. The pictures in the papers mirrored and multiplied you into fiction, science fiction. You were the ones who saw Superman get dumped, Spider-Man chuck in his climbing rope, and Batman swap cloaks for Joker cards. You became grand master works, carved out by vicious mathematicians, all puffed up and roistering, round after round, with a scavenger media mob. You became carrion. You became freaks, ogres, titans, cyclops, whopping great hysterical critter, hulking ruffians and pythonic viruses. You became disease overnight, without knowing it. A flush of septic necessity, feeding, sleeping, dreaming, seething, streaming through the arteries of this land on National Rail overdrive. No play for the fattening of gangly veins. The rot of history and contempt as you nosedive through wounds, old and new. Traumas tapered in at the heel, boorish, petulant. A viscid reminder of otherness and its tang of fear. Your fear, your grandparents' fear, every parent's fear. Anything but feel the dank drip dripping about the cuff of their shoe. The long bleed of love that never sets. The clog of cultural goo. They expected more evil than the evil and the devil himself. A peek behind curtains and TV screens, as close as they're going to get to the spangle of incomers hazing the streets, the nebula weave of unbleached skins, of ebony brows and beards, the compulsive fever of dread and gratitude warping the tone of their landscape, the hue of music, language, trust, loves, hates, and tastes, the guttural hacking of voice recognition smarted to a moose-padded muffle, The dyspraxic trill of literature, scribed full swing in reverse order like a lie detector graph gone ape. Bonkers, lost the plot. The flood of knowledge gaps school never catered for. The tingle of foods that set mouths and minds aflame and put bland back on the map. All gone a tad too far, and never far enough. The tangos and salsas and rumbas that once screamed exotic, breakneck, bane of the waltz, now kneeling to the wield of tribal drums. Bodies bored stiff yearn to bend from hips as if harnessed by a bad birth pill. Born by the wrong ocean, wrong woman. Dance DNA sucked up somewhere down the Strait of Istanbul. And yet, there it goes, the master race, straining to be at one with groove and its disciples. And feel, yes, feel that thing, the burning foe of understanding. A melt of mental gullies the mind isn't ready for. And all since you came. Before there was love, real love. Coffee smelt of grilled almonds. Kids sang to a medley of swastikas and sickles. And neighbors teetered between bootlicking and squealing. But at least they knew who they were dealing with. An otherness that was other but still the same. Same. The great eastern beast come for its prey. All knifing each other beneath a multicolored cape of guilt and indifference. The stitchwork half hanging out. So as I said, the media was really very, very much implicit in a lot of the images that we received back then, swaying public opinion. Some of the jargon that Johnson has come out with in the past couple of years, for example, these are typical words that have come out. World-beating, bravery, courage, victory, triumph, conquer, crush, overcome, trample, battle, war, rage, surrender, heroes, and heroics. These are coming out in everyday language, and that's just talking about a virus. So just imagining using the same mythical jargon to be used to carry hatred, to spread conflict, just an excuse to just not be very kind to other human beings. You were wondering where empathy started and finished. The TV showed red carpet crowds awaiting you at Munich mainland. Flag waving, food waving, the whole forecourt brimming with philanthropy. They cheer where you've come from. They cheer where you're going. They cheer what you've seen and what you've forgotten. They cheer the unknown. Faces they will never see again. Neighbors who never moved in. It has the thrill of Ascot, the marathon they watched but never ran. Alu-wrapped snacks and Evian thrust at you from every angle. Winter weight jackets in the height of the heat. How long will this last? Your first taste of us. Love and hugs just drooling on demand. Nothing like Greeks bearing gifts. You swathe yourself in the German flag like inside-out burritos. You're brave, I'm thinking. That drape will stand between you and staying. It'll watch your every move, march against you on the streets. It'll turn history into a fish story and be the last thing you see if you leave. The symbolism makes me heave. To you, it's a magic cloak. It fends off hunger and war, brothers and sisters lost along the way. The fraudsters who bet you'd never make the finishing line. The fraudsters who knew there was no finishing. And you were hungrier for life than I've ever seen anyone. You made me hungrier for the life I wore like some invisible shroud I forgot I was wearing. You made me ask what flavor life was. You wanted a recipe I didn't have. a recipe I'm still inventing as I go. Our common ground, we move, we flow. We're never ready enough to eat. Too much salt and not enough spice. Like the cook's in love but longs for lust. A new day more thrilling than an old one. Run your tongue along your lips and they're ready for the next. They're taught tequila rims spin a glint of the dreams that will never leave you. They melt and dry and crack and melt again, over and over. I know, because mine do too. So imagine now that you've been traveling for hours and days and however long, and suddenly everything stops and you're surrounded by just grey brick in this forecourt, and you're just waiting. You're waiting for something to happen. We don't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen, including the authorities. And all you want to do is really sleep. They tell you sleep cannot happen yet. Everything has its order, from people to postcodes, photos to food. Every second of your day is now cinched by cues, sculpted by times and dates and desk numbers with more letters than numbers. Doors and hearts that close beyond your groove. Bells and buzzers that have the final say, while the little people play prophet with pensions to swell. Civil servants demoted to gods with no time for real world deeds. You see eagles everywhere, tattooed to buildings and costumes and paperwork you can't read. The cult you want to join, but have neither keys nor clues. They feed candy to your kids to kill time, to wash down the caffeine they've caned like Christmas cold turkeys, all tanked up on E this and E that, sugar surging their state of never sleep, the never-ending game of never landing, milker and football forever it seems, reality we can all cope with. So yes, the drinking coffee thing is about drinking hot water, basically. That's why kids drink coffee, so it's boiled. So yeah, I think part of the quick setup, I think the mentality behind it was, you know, nobody's better at paperwork than Germany, I would say. I can say that from personal experience, although some countries come a very close second. But I think the idea was get the people to safety first and then throw red tape at them, but get them to safety first. Whereas, I mean, I know friends of my mum have been wanting to take in a family and they've waited 2.5, 3 months and the people are still in transit. They still haven't received them. And I think it's really important that you mobilize fast in this kind of situation. The beds arrive. This is an event. This is happening. More wow than you can imagine, more hope than you can handle. They have scheduled sleep. It arrives in pieces. Trucks storming the quad, spewing metal parts from person to person. The untrained chain gang we are. Poles and slats and springs pouring from hand to hand, never touching the ground. People stop to watch, a movie in the making. From boxes to beams, this is love in motion picture. Massive great crates of the stuff, pillows and throws, sweaters and soap, sanitary stuff from public pockets that won't last a week. Ratted mattresses, but not enough to go round. You get 3 blankets instead. I wanted more for you. But who are you with another man's shirt on your back? Your wife speaks for you. She asks me questions I can't answer, one after the other in a spitfire of ruptured English. A gust of needs evaporating before her eyes as people pour in by the busload. 16, 37, 52, 143, 178. The forecourt inflates 40-fold. Familiarity contained to a ring on your finger, a photo in your purse, that scarf around your neck, voices you've seared into your memory, voices you wish you had here, promises you wish you'd delivered. So that was the first night, and they got everyone who actually arrived in the forecourt into bed. So those slats and poles actually got erected into beds that night. I went back the next day, and there were loads of things that you could do to help, basically, and you just had to just jump in. So you could help serving food, you could help at reception, you could help as a translator, interpreter, you could do any manner of things. You just had to just jump in. And we managed to find a room for kids to play in, so they were away from all the adult realities, because I think that was quite important, that they have somewhere where they can have some joy in life. And that's one thing that kids do very, very well. And it's one reason why I decided I'm just going to go in there today, because there's just always a way of finding the positive in things. And this is a little girl who I first came in contact with, called Amina. You'd let me flash picture cards at you for hours, hungry for words, numbers, knowledge, and nonsense. You don't know that others can quash this with the same words, numbers, knowledge, and nonsense. Others high up, more than several times your age, because if you learn, you can stay. If you speak, you can query. Call them out when push comes to shove. But they can't curb your curiosity, muzzle the smarts that help you sift photos and scribbles at 6. They can't keep you from their schools and humour or historical secrets once you have the keys, parents or no parents. I found you there fending for yourself in quiet corners of the kiddie's cage, puzzling over puzzles with infinite pieces missing, pieces with ripped picks and toddler Nash knobs, pieces that were never there in the first place, the wee price you pay for donation. But you pit your wits anyway, sharpen your tools on the ones we share, lean as half-sucked candy, when really the tongue has more to give. She was a very, very smart kid, didn't have parents. And I went home that night and I suddenly thought to myself, the games I decided to play with her were so language, teachery based. I was going into teacher mode as a teacher. I suddenly thought, no, actually, it's the adults who need this, because they need a chance of integrating. They're the ones who will get judged for speaking or not speaking the language. So I went back in the next day with a roll of white paper, went in the canteen around lunchtime, rolled it out and started writing the alphabet on it. And I had some people who came up to me and tried in English to say, yes, teach us, we need German. So we went and searched for a room, another free room. There were lots of free rooms at this point. There weren't shortly after, because there were 1,100 people who filled the town hall at its peak. But at this point there were free rooms, and yeah, we found this space. I wrote a time on the wall, 6 p.m, and said, tomorrow, be there. And the English speakers spread the word, because at that point they had no German. And yeah, and the next day I walk in and the room is filled with people sitting on the floor. We had no chairs, no tables, no blackboard, no paper, no pens, nothing, but they were there. And I had no criteria. They were, as far as I was concerned, they were all beginners. I learned originally as a beginner, as a foreigner. And you got to start somewhere. I didn't mind what age they were, what profession they were, whether they had education or none, which was the case, and some people had never held a pen in their life. But I think the most important thing is that there's this contact going on amongst all this stuff that's happening, and that once the novelty of being safe wears off, that people have a sense of purpose, and that people feel like, hey, I'm learning something, because while you're learning, you feel like I'm living, I'm growing, I'm moving on with my life. Even if it's only learning a few words, you feel like you're doing something that is moving you forward. And I felt that was really important, and that I wanted to give skills that I had onto other people that could help. The room multiplies within minutes. 3 becomes 12, becomes 25, becomes 45. Chair's a luxury we don't have. Just an overlap of flesh and bone twinging side by side. Just the hungry and restless looking to fill their time with something beyond strife and sinking dinghies, where hot and cold, love and pain mean the same in any language. The attendance list hanging on the wall is empty. No one knows enough German to realize it's a list. That the land they've signed up for demands names on just about everything. And you have to choose your lists carefully. Consider the pros and cons of wiring desires in print, because the wrong one could mean out of sight, out of mind. Tacky black question mark in a system that's both prison and passport to your future. Before you commit. A hem of catalysts and cocktails. I wake screaming, monstrous reams of figures gushing into the air like rogue computer coding, from registered arrival dates to birth and expiry rates. This is how we lose track of love. This is how we force feed amnesia to a state of bulimic greed, of I've bitten off more than I can chew. The reasons merge now. The reasons have changed. I increase my hours, my input, my conscience now bigger than the fuse of my ego, and now the fear that it'll all go pop. I watch everything else around me deflate, from income to fun. Voices not my own tell me to stop, but I can't, because stop is failure. Stop is fraud and desertion. Stop is my guilt for having other goals. Stop is an admission that this will never stop, when in fact, it's only just got started. So yeah, I kind of go at things like a bull in a china shop, and I just go too far in one go. So I had people telling me to slow down and to not do so much. Someone in the room who did tell me to do this and just do 1 day a week, and I didn't really listen because that's just me. So one thing I wasn't aware of at the time, because I was just saying, if you can come, come. I don't mind where you're from. I don't mind what age you are, what sex you are. What I didn't realize was that actually people were sifting themselves automatically. And as the weeks went by, it's a load of rubbish. It's probably a week later, I came out at 9 o'clock at night, and I ran into another woman. She was like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I was teaching." And she was, "So am I." And I hear that there's another woman who's doing the same. And she started to organize stuff. So she was like, "Well, let's get organized. Let's see if we can get a timetable up and running." And which is what she did, because she was a lot more skilled at doing that than I am. I'm just very much more hands-on. Within a couple of weeks, lessons were happening all day long, not just at random times of night by random volunteers who were just turning up, like myself. And that was pretty amazing. It gave people a chance to not only have smaller classes, but also to just have more attention, have more contact. And it also tapped into something that I didn't realize in my group, that there were very, very deep factions within the residence, the residency itself, and naivety on my part. But people had decided, well, I'm not going in that room because there's a Syrian, I'm not going in that room because there's an Iraqi. None of this was of my choosing. But you will see in the book that there is actually a figure called Necro who is rather passionate about Iraqis. And I don't think I'm going to read that right now. I think that's quite nice for you to read on your own and have your own impression. But these factions were alive and well, and not only in the sense of countries against each other, but there was this hierarchy between refugees coming from different zones as well. So depending on how at risk they were, this feeling of I have more right to be here than you do, which is naturally, maybe it's a natural human thing, but actually, you know, from the economic migrant is being threatened by mafia mobs and is also being life threatened, then that is also a valid reason for wanting to leave your country. And I don't believe I have a right to judge that. So I'm going to jump over here. So lots of figures who've left a very lasting impression on me. There was this one couple called Zaid and Intasa, who I taught for a few weeks, came very close to, and then randomly asked me for my number. No reason to, because nobody knew if they were going to be staying or going, moved on somewhere else. But there was this kind of unsaid rule that if you arrive in a particular town, such as Berlin, that you wouldn't stay in Berlin. Or if you arrived in Munich, you would probably move away from Munich. So these displacements generally happened in the early hours of the morning, and there wasn't much you could do about it. They just happened. People just vanished suddenly. We couldn't really keep track of everybody. But they did actually randomly give me the number the night before. On the 29th of the 9th, it rang twice more than I wanted. A number I didn't know. A number I knew without needing to know what I didn't. I just knew, knowing that knowing couldn't help. My heart crazed Romania, my heart rattling full-fisted against the cages of my chest for the bounce and bend of a system that I have no access to. Unknowledge is such a saintly tool, and I wish I could unknow what I don't know, blindfold the unbearable, unable to bear, unable to run. So I do the next best thing and just stare at it, at the scud of hope spindling out of it, spit for spit, the future set in motion long before we are ready for it. And we'd give anything to know which God has put us in charge here, moving you on, because your birthday bingo call has come through again, slapdash as Vietnam draftings, and now you're shifted, elapsed, slungshot somewhere east of the most easternest communa, where too many white men have been left hanging too long, and they don't know who to blame first. So they got shifted to this place called Eisenberg, and there are actually two of them. One's in the west and one's in the east. And I got excited because I thought maybe they'd been sent westwards, which was not the case. And I was rather concerned about their well-being. So yes, I'm going to move on from there actually. But they were incredibly important to me. So as I said before, we had lots of people with different educational backgrounds. I had people who had never picked up a pen. I had stonemasons next to doctors and architects and engineers. And I'm very thirsty and I need to have a glass of water, I think. Hang on. Sorry, I digress very, very easily. Yeah, so I had lots of people from these different backgrounds. And I think the most important thing for me was that people were just learning. But it's so frustrating when you know that you are highly skilled and you cannot work. You're not allowed to work. You could work in the medical system if you're a doctor, because you have the skills and the experience, but you're not allowed to, because you don't have that stamp, you don't have that certificate saying you have the right to work in Germany for that. And you don't have the right to stay, so you can't work yet. And it's the same for any field. You can't work, you can't study. You can just study German, but you can't get into the system. So having those language skills is so incredibly key. But it's frustrating for people who really want to be working, which is most people. At the welcome gate, they strap barbed wire about your savvy hands, fingers that are trained to perform tucks and twists on precious organ grind in their sleep, like they're buckling shoes, carving out squamous malware, pin and bolt, as they were born to. Fingers that spent more time inside other people's bodies than your own. Fingers that have stood between life and death, awaiting orders from above. Orders that now come from the Home Office, Job Centre, Department for Work and Pensions. Stay low, keep your eyes to the ground. Don't get too comfortable with that deft sweep of your doctor's wherewithal. It's dependents, not docs, that they want. A whole hush of airheads, not public service saints. Makes them so much easier to send packing. Your degrees don't count. Your skills, compassion, and acumen don't count. You with that spotless track record, with an earshot, go stand in line. Yeah. How is everyone? How much can you listen to some more? Would you like to have questions? What's everyone feeling right now?
I would like, if possible, for us to get as far as, say, the epilogue, which was how you thought you might finish the reading, so that we've got time for questions.
Okay.
I apologize if I'm rushing people, but that's very moving and it's quite difficult to take it all in. So I think it would be great to have a chance for people to explore that themselves as well.
Do you mean the epilogue?
The epilogue, yeah, you said that might be one of the things.
So shall I just do the run that we talked about?
Yeah, you could, or you could read one of the others that you had lined up, because I know you've, I don't know quite the numbers of all the things here, but you mentioned 37. Have you read 37? No,
I was about to, but I don't know how everyone's feeling.
Why don't you read that? Okay. Because it's actually about you as well.
It is.
Which is quite important.
Okay, so my dad's actually a big part of this, and he's sort of underlying in the collection. My dad's no longer here. He hasn't been on this planet for quite some time now, long before this was written. And there are several people in the room who did know him and knew that he started teaching rather late in life, but found his vocation, and he always put his students first. That he put them before everything, in fact. And the one thing he used to say to my brother and I: "Don't be a teacher. It's a young person's profession, but don't be a teacher." And he used to get very worn out when he was working during term time and everything, and put everything into it. But the other factor is that my dad and his family are really sewn into this book because of his background, because of his own parents being displaced in the 30s and having been welcomed as asylum seekers into the UK. And so he's kind of, that setting is sewn into the irony of this collection, because of being just, working with people who are displaced, me unsure whether I'm going to be displaced by my own birthland in the country that I've chosen to live in. So it's all rather confusing, but just feeling a sense of being in limbo, and at the mercy of people deciding stuff around you, and you not being able to live where you want to live and feel safe where you feel safe, and be amongst the community that you've built up. That these are all various aspects. But anyway, so my dad is in the background of some of these stories. Dad would brain me. We've had regular words this past year and no one tells it straighter. I miss the flesh version, but left too young. It's like I've only truly known him since he went. And the guilt of that never goes. Though he backed the education bit, I know he would. The earth I want to move by stirring minds, the hunger for people to learn themselves free. He'd have got that. He'd have got why Bora wanted more than Albania could give. Sick of packing supermarket shelves instead of studies she had to quit for grain. 160 euros a month and no breaks. And I know he'd have done the same. Seen through Albie's urge for school and skills he couldn't get back home. Siblings smart enough to change the world, just not there. I'm trying not to get attached. I'm trying to just teach, but I don't know how to just teach human beings who have run from harm and hypocrisies that keep them from their future. They're in my head when I shut the door at night, when the thrill of a coffee time paper numbs the urgency of their pleas. My days bathe in a bleed of privacy, an illusion busting out of the screen of life, a piddly word not immune to connection. I cannot treat them like algorithms. There's no arm's length in a smile, no misunderstanding when cash is swept under the carpet, swept wildly to one side. They want to see the city I see. They want to be reborn. None of us know where we'll be in 3 months' time, though I don't tell them this. I immerse them in fantasy, carry it in my bag, on my bike, and shield them from the facts that will wrench us apart. So it wasn't bureaucracy that pulled us apart, but I was completely and utterly exhausted, and trying to hold down day job and working 3 to 4 nights a week teaching, and I just had to stop basically. By Christmas, I used Christmas as having a chance to break off, and I felt an enormous amount of guilt at it, but I tried to get the people that I was working with most intensely to a certain level of German. That was really important to me, but it wasn't easy. So yeah, epilogue. Okay, so the epilogue is it was we kind of decided, well, this is quite a nice thing to do at the end, because I wanted the book to be about the stories of the people that I was encountering, and the experiences there, but having my own experiences interwoven into that, my own history interwoven into that, it seemed appropriate to have that at the end, and not interfering. So I initially moved to Berlin for creative reasons, but that's the way Berlin is. I was looking for exchange, excitement. I was looking for a certain way of life, a certain community who thought and explored in a similar way. I was 26 at the time, looking for adventure. And I think what I hadn't banked on was running into elements of my past, of my family's past. Even in small dose, my family was not German, but obviously affected by the impact of the German machine, shall we say. And the fact that not only my past was affected by it, I guess who I am today as a person, I'm not saying in a negative way, but who I am and who I will become is all part of that. And what was important for me was to, I think, build positive experience. It had nothing to do with, initially for me, to do with reworking pasts or anything like that. I think that just happened automatically. And the experiences that I build, I focus very much on now, on being there in the now, and the community that I have, the friends that I have, my relationship to the city itself were all key. And that is my experience of Berlin. I can't say it's my experience of Germany. I chose Berlin. It's the same as saying, well, I prefer to live in Manchester instead of Liverpool or Norwich or wherever. You can't say that all these cities are the same, but my relationship, my feeling of home with the city of Berlin, regardless of where I am, and I think I can feel a sense of home in a lot of places if you have that mentality where you want to fit in. But I felt at home, and I still do, despite being in the UK at the moment. And I think the other thing is, I think because despite my grandparents not being German, they did communicate in German. So my earliest memories are actually oddly in German, not in English. And I should probably explain actually, so the title Federal Gods, it was initially going to be a mixture of English and German. It was going to actually be the Bundesgott, which is a word I made up. Because I felt this is the idea of turning it into English was more that it was actually reflecting all governments' reaction to power and literally being in charge of life and death decisions for other people. And I didn't want the whole book to be focused on Germany in that sense, because I think it's a global issue, and I think it's how we pull together as global nations, because people move, people are migrant. This is what populations do, and we can't afford to not pull together. So it's the title of the epilogue, the Bundesgott, instead of the book. They said only good things would happen if you prayed to the Bundesgott. There'd be food and shelter, and above all, life, good or bad, big or small, but life away from bombs, brown boots, and the slough of bile you called home. So I hung an eagle in the corner of every room where my laughing Buddha would have been. I missed the Buddha. It was harder to smile at a bird of prey, its penchant for stamps and stars. The Bundesgott takes things so damn seriously. 80 years on and still the same gut-wrenching relics of the Führer, fisting out of the front page on a Sunday morn. Lucid syncopations with Mahler and Freud we call culture, or live and well. The Süddeutsche does us proud. The Bundesgott has a healthy love of poetry, reels them off word perfect from the pit of glib constitution, trophy of the tax office, driving force of the job and housing centre, a bedrock of psalms with just one very long corridor. I asked for his protection. It's the first time. Before, I thought it was just a God I needed, any God, anyone I could find inside, but I was wrong, and Grandpa right, as I await goodwill. You may stay, you may go, long after La Manche has parted. You become a believer. You, heathen, leave your pagan years behind. Hallelujah, praise the Lord. The Bundesgott loves you, even if he didn't love your Opa or Oma and gnawed the rest of their kin to ash. You jump in, take a front pew. I got why Pa grounds his teeth at night, perhaps why I do the same. They brace high seas to swerve the Bundesgott, From Brunn and beyond to the Dover docks, the rounds of mutant alopecia, the non-existence meant for them, until they found each other in nothingness, had kids and grandkids who came from nothingness, who became the fear they had run from. The inheritance sucks until someone shouts, stop, enough. Make peace with this monstrous piece of past that's more mine than not, too rank to be real. Hard to see in this place that boasts home in the nest of my now. And when I think about it, aside the guilt of ambling free, without the brute of history's yield, I know there'd be no me. History is seared into my heart, but doesn't have to close it. I choose. Do the opposite. Make my home in the hunter's den, and then help others to get there too. An exile for an exile. I earn fair and square. No special favors or systematic repay. This gift from Gramps. Rehousing the past, resetting the present. I take the path of most resistance, baton in hand, my birthland now a breeding ground for the same. So much senseless self-harm drummed into my DNA, hushed, unconscious, and so virally fertile. It must be easier to just never change. Options, options, whilst I've been Brexited, de-Britoned, another blow from those who hail difference and divide, unpicking the stitches as fast as we can thread the eye. Old angst, they've padded along the way, while we get burnt, spiced up, something like splintered inside our fiberglass lives, until we are sand, all of us. Run a finger through, and we become one. So that's the end of that poem. I jumped, I didn't read the whole of it because it's too long.
Thank you very much, Claire, for your reading tonight. I would like to get people to unmute because I feel this need to say thank you loudly, and especially with the help of the guys in your co-working space as well. So does everybody like to unmute? I can see some of you doing that. I think this is a terrific book and an amazing message, and I want it to be shared widely. So I hope everybody will tell people what they've heard tonight. But first of all, let's clap, because it's really amazing. Thank you. Now, would anyone like to ask questions? At the bottom of the screen, there's something called reactions. At least it is on my system. And if you click reactions, a little hand will pop up, and then I will be able to ask you to tell us your question. So that would be fine if anyone wants to do that. I'm going to go back to gallery view. Okay, we do have a strategy for what to do to you. If you don't ask any questions, you can't have any supper. Right, is there anyone who'd like to simply put their hand up, physically put their hand up, bearing in mind that I am trying to see a lot of people on the screen? Okay, Rodney, please tell us.
Earlier on, Claire, you used the metaphor of movies for the poems you were reading, and I must say, when you read them, it's sort of a bit like going to a premiere of a sort of film. Did you think of your poems as being read like that? Sort of, you know, you were going to a movie theatre, you know, going on the red carpet to see the film, i.e. your poem?
No, it was, to be honest, it was more, it felt like the way the media was filming this, and then people were screaming and waving flags. It's a bit like first night of a new film, you know, how you see it at Leicester Square, that kind of image. And that's what it felt like. It felt euphoric. And I think anyone who was around in Germany around that time in the audience, I think you would agree, there was this feeling of euphoria that, hey, we're helping, we're doing something here. It didn't feel real. It felt like this isn't going to last that long. This is just at the moment. This is just this initial feeling of philanthropy. So it felt plastic. It felt, in a way, it was a good thing, but it was just this feeling, and you know, that feeling in the bottom of your stomach that's telling you, when's this going to pop? Yeah. But I guess the fact that these were sort of running thoughts, I guess you could say, you know, that is a movie going on as well. But that wasn't my thinking in the actual text itself. But it's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Helen.
Oh, Claire, thank you so much for.
Hey, Helen, nice to see you.
Hey, lovely to see you, Claire. I so enjoyed your reading, and yeah, I'd like to ask you about your form and style of writing. You know, I'm very struck by it as a long poem with all these different parts, you know, sorts of sequence. And so I'm interested in, so you were saying at the beginning that there's a kind of chronology to it, and as I've been reading the book already, you know, have a sense of that. I haven't quite finished the whole thing yet, but yes, I'm interested, you know, in did you kind of jump about when you were writing it and then kind of collage it into a chronology? So that's one part of the question. And then the other thing that you know, I'm really interested in the poetry of witness, and I don't know if you're familiar with, say, for example, Charles Reznikoff's work, Testimony.
I don't actually, but it sounds good.
And yeah, so there's with what's called objectivist writing, was sort of, you know, quite kind of focusing in or almost on the sort of facts of a situation, whether it's a court case or sort of the facts of the Nuremberg trials. But your style, nevertheless, is very playful and quite richly layered, sort of wordplay. And so I was just, yeah, interested in kind of hearing your comments on style and form.
We've known each other for quite a long time, I guess, in the poetry scene. So that play with satire, that play with irony, I think when you're dealing with very serious matter, I think to have a sense of humor about the whole thing, you know, even if it's just laughing at yourself, I think that's key in keeping me sane in that kind of situation. But I think it. Do you want to give me the first question you want to ask specifically?
The first piece of the question was just sort of interest in, you know, whether you kind of wrote quite chronologically or whether the pieces were sort of made more retrospectively from memory and then collaged into chronology.
I would say it was pretty much written chronologically, mainly because so I wrote it last year, but because of how I write in very intensive phases. So I wrote it very, very quickly from beginning to end. It's probably going to horrify Camilla to discover the truth of this, but I wrote it in January and February last year, cover to cover. I edited it fully in March. But I don't put it down when I'm writing it. I don't put it down until it's almost how I want it to be anyway. I find that very difficult, just because I'm very tunnel vision and not very good at multitasking. So that was kind of the process, and then I sent it to Camilla shortly after that. But how I'd actually managed to sort of get that flow in there, because at the time I was very aware of I want to document this. I want to journal what I'm going through so that I can process everything that's going on for myself and these stories, and to remember these people. I really had the sense of people are just going to disappear, and I want to remember this. So I was journaling in German. So all my notes, everything that I have written in the book, it's from German notes, almost diary notes, I would say, about feelings and experiences. It wasn't written, the initial stuff wasn't written at all in poetic form. It was just literally my impressions, and they stayed. So these are vibrant feelings that stayed even the course of 5 years, just over 5 years. So that flow stayed in there, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, thanks so much for sharing that. That's really
Thank you for your
fascinating.
question. That's a great question.
Do we have anyone else who wishes to ask a question? I've got one of my own that's burning a hole in my piece of paper.
Go on.
Okay. You've called Federal Gods a natural sequel to the Oranges of Revolution.
Yeah.
So how they look very different.
Yeah.
But how do they differ in your eyes? And how did writing each of them change you as a person?
They were written from, well, actually Helen's question was very, very apt there, because that does lead into it. So whereas with Federal Gods, I wrote with distance. I wrote not only from a different language, I went from journaling in German into actually writing the product itself, the book itself in English. I wrote with distance of a few years to process. And it wasn't that I couldn't have written it before. I had other responsibilities. I had to work. I had other projects going on. And I think when the moment's right, you just do it. And I think there wasn't much thought that went into it. It was just I was ready to write it by the end of Christmas a year ago. And with the Oranges of Revolution, it was also written in a similar time period. It's also written very, very quickly. However, I wrote it at the time of everything that was going on. So I was very involved with Stop the War. I was living in London at the time. I was working in a London secondary school in Hackney. So I was very much exposed to how government policy was affecting young people. How, cutting libraries at the time and NHS services and welfare benefits for people was really having an impact on the kids around me. There were more academies springing up and state schools, pretty much disappearing. So I was seeing all this happening and all these the dissatisfaction that was happening as far as UK riots were concerned. So it was written more I was much more the observer. I was observing what was going on, even though I was involved in the UK side of things. What was very, very apparent to me with the Arab Spring was how revolution was being conducted there with very valid reasons, in a very different way, in a much more mature way, compared to what was happening in the UK with during the riots, destroying communities and running riot, literally, when actually it was the government that they were dissatisfied with, but they were destroying each other's property, and there's all this chaos going on, and it just seemed, I felt like I was involved in it, but at the same time I was more detached, even though I was writing from a position of being very much within it. Subjective, maybe too subjective, but maybe you learn this with experience. Like, it's written 10 years earlier. I was a different character.
Very true.
You change, and you change your style, and you change how you see the world and how you want to react to everything around you, or not react, or just watch and learn and see how you can grow from what you've experienced. And I think, to answer your question with how that's changed me as a person, I can see how I did things differently with the first book, the second book, and then through this experience, for example, of working within an asylum home setting, to see how I went about that in line with my daily life. I can see how I can improve upon that kind of situation if I decided to go into doing this again. how I would do things differently. So I think it's looking at, overall, just looking how you can develop yourself ultimately, never mind what you're
Absolutely.
writing.
And the thing that comes through from both of what you're saying, both those books, is that, for me at least, the role of poetry is to say that something that you believe to be true about something you feel is very important. And if you can do it lyrically in all different ways, that's great. But the core of it all, it has to feel truth and importance to you. Otherwise, it's not going to reach anybody. And I think your book does that. And I'm really, really thrilled to have written it, published it. So I have a timescale going on here, which I must apologize for. So I'm keeping my eye on the time, but I would like to know if there are any more questions or comments you'd like to share before we close. Is there anybody who has something that they would like to introduce?
Do we have questions? Oh, we've got a question here. Do you want to come over here, actually?
Oh, yeah,
Or do you want to just
please.
shout it out?
No, don't shout it out because no one will hear it.
No. She doesn't want you to shout it out. Come a bit closer. You can hide behind the screen. I can turn the camera off if you want.
Can I ask you a question? Then you
come a tiny bit closer. No one can see you from there. Okay, go on.
Good evening.
This is Duncan.
Hello.
Hi,
Are you
Duncan.
Hi there. Hi. Sorry. Are you an optimist or a pessimist? Do you think there's actually something fundamentally failing in our ability to cope with, well, not asylum seeking, but immigration, or do you think we're doomed, or do you think we can actually, maybe move past the Brexit nonsense and stuff and actually be nice to people that need help? Are you an optimist or pessimist?
When you say we, do you mean the UK?
Society.
Or
The
society
world,
in general?
America, yeah.
I don't think I would be doing the kind of work that I do without believing in it having a positive impact. Otherwise, that would be a waste of my time and other people's. I think it's, even if it's just one person or one person's mindset you manage to change, or one person's experience of, for example, living in Germany. I didn't tell my students that I was English. I changed my name to Clara. I signed in as Clara. I didn't leave any other trace. I just wanted them to feel that the students, that what they were seeing was a positive representation of Germany. So their first impression was a good one, and their first contact. So I see that as something that's positive, and I think that's what changes. I think you change mindsets through positive experience, and I think by creating more positive experiences with time, that happens.
Yes, it's a good question, actually. It's a question
very
that
good
bothers me a
question.
lot. So, Duncan, thank you. I see so many sad stories and so many people justifiably angry, and sometimes I just feel helpless to get the world to go in the direction that we all need it to go. And then you get a book or a situation and it does actually seem to reach people and move them on. Well, I just want to thank everybody very, very much for coming this evening, and there will be a recording. I'm just about to stop it now, and we'll process it and put it up on YouTube. But also you can buy the book, and I recommend that you not only buy it, but that you talk to your friends about it. And thank you very, very much, Claire, for involving Palewell Press in all this and making it an extra special book this year. That's brilliant.
It's lovely to work with you.
Great. Okay, thanks all very much. We can say goodbye now, and really enjoyed tonight.
Thank you for coming.
Cheers, Richard.
So lovely to see you again.
And Helen, I look forward to your piece that you're doing. Marvelous. Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Claire. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Claire. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Claire. Bye.
Bye.